This is Kevin Carroll. We're just waiting for some folks to jump on the webinar today, making some small talk before the event. We'll probably start just a hair after 10 o'clock, like 10:03 or 10:04 or so, to allow everyone to come on. It looks like most of us are in our virtual headquarters. I'm in Rancho Penasquitos. Chris, where are your virtual temporary global headquarters?
I am in Encinitas.
You're in Encinitas. And Nate, it looks like you're downtown somewhere.
Yeah, I'm actually at the office. I figured this was such a special occasion that this deserved the office background and me combing my hair. So.
And Joe, what about you?
I'm in Santee, the AI capital of the world. Also.
You know, I was just gonna say that Santee is probably the AI capital of the world. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Guitars and AI.
Which go together.
They do.
You know, it's been interesting watching the weather in Texas, and I'm certainly not making light of it. I have some family down there that's going through some tough times, but you could just imagine, you know, some of those folks who've moved in the past year or so from California to Texas, or you know, have a little more of an understanding of technology's perfect climate here in San Diego.
Yeah, Kevin, interestingly enough, I'm trying to convince a candidate to accept an offer, which was the phone call I had right before this. And he was talking about he's in a blizzard. And I told him the only way he's going to find a blizzard is at the Dairy Queen if he comes.
Nah.
So, I'm trying to get him out here.
Very nice.
You know, it really, you know, and there was this, you know, I say technology is perfect climate a lot. That was something that, you know, some of us came up with in the early 2000s, and we shied away from it because it made us sound like we were only relying on the climate, right? Well, we're this technology town, and I've been going back to it lately. I mean, it really is, you know, a selling point, you know, for the region, and not just because of the sun, but because of lifestyle and wellness and all these things that come together, you know, to make San Diego technology's perfect climate. And, you know, there's a reason why it's expensive to live here. I mean, this is, you know, it's, you know, I was, like I said, my family in Texas, I mean, yesterday, you know, it's been one of the coldest weeks, and, you know what, 40 degrees at night and 60 degrees during the, you know, during the day.
We're definitely spoiled here.
I've already acclimated from New York. I'm freezing today.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blood gets, I've lived in San Diego for 20 years, and I moved from Canada before here and lived there for 20 years. And I have to say my blood is thinner, and I'm a wimp now compared to what I used to put up with. It's 45 degrees walking the dog in the morning. I need a parka. Like, this is, go figure.
Yeah, no, I mean, when it was 45 degrees in the morning in New York, I mean, that was probably like April at that point, and I was out in, like, you know, a long sleeve shirt, shorts, you know, I mean, that was like warming up.
It's all relative.
It is.
Those of you who are just logging on, we're getting ready to wait for some folks to jump on, and we'll start just a little bit after 10. We just have the organizers and the presenters just making some small talk before the event. Yeah, my brother's in Texas, and you know, one of the biggest problems they have is water pipes bursting in the house. And you know, normally they let it drip a little bit, but in there's a lot of cases there's just no water, so it's really tough. He was fortunate; he had wood, and he hasn't lost power yet. So, but he knows a lot of people that just don't know what to do. You know, he's had to go out and deliver some wood to some folks, and it's pretty dire down there.
Yeah. I did hear it's going to warm up on the weekend in most of the states, so hopefully this is short-lived and they'll get through it, no problem.
Yeah, I saw next week jumping up into the 70s, and you know, in Texas. So hopefully everything will be okay.
There'll be flooding.
Yeah.
Yeah, one extreme.
Nice.
Yeah.
Those of you logging on, we're waiting till just a couple of minutes, and we will get going. Just waiting for some the registration. So please hang on, and we'll be with you in just a second, and we'll start our presentation. We've started our, we do an annual data science day, and Tech San Diego's in the throes of planning that. That's going to be in May, and that's going to have to be a virtual event. As we partner with UCSD, and they've just announced no in-person meetings until May 31st at least. So we're going to go virtual on that one as well. It's interesting to see how the students, we have our Jacobs Talent Initiative, which works to keep the students here in the region. And they're really hungry for networking and finding out about companies. So that effort has been, we've been really, really busy on meeting with student groups and students and newsletters and everything else, trying to get the top performing students to select the region as their career destination. 10:02, so probably 10:04, we'll go ahead and get going here. We have folks logging on. Welcome if you're just joining us. And again, we're going to get going in just a couple seconds here. Trying to break the silence so we don't have just silence as people are logging on and they're looking at our at our mugs, wondering what the heck is going on.
Kevin, I have to admit, I love awkward. So I just like to see how long we can stay silent.
I can't do it.
We can write an algorithm to optimize that, I'm sure.
Rattles my nerves too much. I had a this morning right outside the house. We're all at our remote offices. I had a wood chipper right outside the house, and I was afraid I was going to be interrupting, but thankfully, I think they went away. They didn't get the memo, I guess, that we were doing an event this morning.
It always happens that way. You got to get like the perfect thing. Your kids come running in, the wood chipper shows up. Something.
Yeah. Toys we used to play with as kids, the wood chippers, right? All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name's, I get to officially introduce myself. My name's Kevin Carroll. I'm the Executive Director of Tech San Diego. Welcome to our AI and Machine Learning Trends event. We've been doing this series for, almost a year, I guess, Chris, almost a year now with our friends at Cooley. And, we have several goals in doing these events. And, on the surface, it's just bringing information about latest AI and machine learning trends. But really our secondary goal as an organization, we want this region to be a center of excellence in AI and machine learning. So, with our university resources and with, you're going to hear through this report, it very quickly is becoming a center of excellence in that area. And hopefully, the end result will be make it easier for technology companies to recruit and retain a very qualified workforce, especially in the AI space. So those are kind of our goals in doing the series. And again, in addition to just making sure that you guys have the latest about what's going on in AI and machine learning, you could always go to techsd.org to find out more information about Tech San Diego. We have a very active data science, AI, machine learning. We have a couple different program series. We have Data Science Day annually. So lots of good events for those of you interested in the topics. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and partner in crime, Chris Montgomery and Cooley. Chris heads the business development efforts in the San Diego office of Cooley. His 20 years of leadership experience spans from early stage technology ventures to multinational media corporations. Chris assists clients with a myriad of activities, including funding strategies and business formation. And One of the things about Chris is part of the team that brought the first MP3 player to market, which was always interesting and may date Chris a little bit. But Chris, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thanks for making me feel much older now. Thanks, Kevin. Cooley is really proud to sponsor the Tech San Diego AI ML series that we have for about a year. I wanted to take just a minute, if I could, and do the sort of obligatory commercial for Cooley for those who are not familiar with Cooley before I turn it over to Nate and Joe. But Cooley recently celebrated its 100th anniversary, so we've been around for quite a long time. Cooley's an international law firm, full service. We have over 1,100 attorneys in 16 offices around the world, and our clients span over 90 countries. We cover everything from corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, intellectual property, financial transactions for financing, IPOs, and litigation. We represent over 6,000 private high-growth startup clients, from pre-formation teams right through to very sophisticated companies that you would be very aware of. Snowflake, Zoom, eBay, Facebook, NVIDIA, Uber. Those are some of our very recognizable clients. It's also interesting that we represent 40% of the US companies on the Wall Street Journal's $1 billion startup club. It's really in our DNA as a law firm to work with disruptive and early stage companies. We're recently ranked #1 most active law firm for VC financings globally and in the US. And Kevin mentioned that much of what I do is in my day-to-day is connecting entrepreneurs with capital as they're growing their companies. For the entrepreneurs that are on the call today, I wanted to point out a great free online resource that's called Cooley Go. That's COOLEYGO.com. It's filled with blog posts and a really valuable document generator. And that document generator can do things like help you with your incorporation documents, generate convertible notes, contract agreements, things like that that are really essential for entrepreneurs. So if you have a chance, check that out. With that beside us, I'd now like to turn it over to Nate Kelley from the San Diego EDC and Joe Rohner from Booz Allen Hamilton to walk us through the presentation. And Kevin did mention, but there is a window where you can ask questions. So we really encourage you to be as interactive as possible as we go along, and we'll address some of those as we go and then some later on. So with that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Right before we turn it over to Nate and Joseph, just want to reiterate there are questions. Chris and I are going to fade into the background, and we'll be monitoring those questions. We're probably not going to answer those on the fly, but we'll wait till Nate and Joseph are done, and then we'll start answering those questions. So I didn't mean to interrupt the flow, but Nate and Joseph, you guys can introduce yourself, and we'll turn it over to you guys.
Sure. So my name is Nate Kelley. I work at the San Diego Regional EDC as a senior manager of research. Relatively new to the organization and to San Diego in general. Prior to this, I worked in finance in New York, and I was also an economist at Moody's Analytics. Anyway, yeah, very happy to be here this morning. Thank you to Chris and Cooley, and of course, Kevin and Sarah at Tech San Diego, and everybody else who joined us this morning on this brutally cold winter morning here in San Diego. So with that, I'll pass it over to Joe for a quick introduction.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you to Tech San Diego. Thank you to Cooley. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about myself. Probably the most important thing is I'm a San Diego native. I don't know anything other than San Diego, nor do I want to know anything other than San Diego. So I'm excited to be in this venue. I'm a director of artificial intelligence for Booz Allen Hamilton. Hopefully you know of us, but if you don't, our largest office out of the DC metro area is right here in San Diego with 1,300 employees. I help the firm cover up and down the West Coast, into Honolulu, into Asia, on all of our AI ML services out west. Being a San Diego native, I'm a double Aztec, got both my bachelor's statistics from SDSU and then went and got my MBA there. Coming into this, it's been great to partner with the San Diego EDC and Nate as part of their AI ML advisory board. And Booz Allen is proud to be the underwriter on this study and partnership. And with that, Nate, let's jump into it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joe. So as Joe alluded to, we're going to be presenting a study that we've been working on for almost a year. It's about an 8-month study that was designed to measure the current reach and the potential future impacts of artificial intelligence and machine learning here in San Diego. And so this is what we're going to be outlining today is going to be the key takeaways from a study that concluded and was launched in early December. So we're a couple months into it, which feels like a couple of decades, but we'll do our best to recount exactly what it is that we learned on this study here, and hopefully provide you all with some additional information and some interesting thoughts to walk away from here. So without further ado, we'll kick off by having a look at how we defined AI, the general importance of this technology in our daily lives, and its potential effects on global growth in the coming decades. So really, the first thing we needed to accomplish with this report was to define exactly what it is that we wanted to study. And given its complexity, AI has been defined in different ways by different people in different contexts, right? So for instance, AI has been equated to data science in certain instances, and still others have thought of AI in terms of general automation, in particular robotics. However, in our opinion, these definitions were too broad, or at least in terms of being able to effectively study these technologies. You know, for instance, data science could just as easily refer to someone applying a rolling average over a set of time series data or calculating a linear regression equation, which is hardly enough to be awarded the lofty moniker of AI, right? And so for the purposes of this study, AI was defined as computer-based automation that seeks to simulate or enhance human decision-making. And it's the phrase decision-making that provides the crucial distinction between AI and other forms of automation. So really what we're saying here is that AI is able to use more general tools like data science and robotics, or at least, work in tandem with robotics, but it uses them to, particularly the data science aspect, it uses information to make decisions or change course as new information becomes available and as circumstances warrant.
Yeah, so Nate, if I can build on that, when I talk to people here in San Diego, or I talk to any of my clients, depending on how mature people are in their AI journey, there's some misnomers, and Nate hit on them. Sometimes people will interchangeably and innocently exchange the terms data science, AI, machine learning, and throw in a couple others. But there are some distinctions behind it, and we thought it was really important to have a baseline here so that we had results that we could say, here's what we mean when we say AI. If you're wondering and you're still getting familiar with the terms, what I would share with you is that data science itself is really the art, the two words itself, the science of dealing with data. Data is everything. Data is ugly. Data in the wild and raw, it's unruly. So it's what tools, what tradecraft, what technologies do you need to make data usable for higher level analytics, which is where AI picks up. And we actually bring in the mathematics, the statistics, the algorithms to get to that decision making that Nate was hitting on. And machine learning falls within AI, as well as a variety of other techniques, NLP, computer vision. But these terms get thrown around all the time, and admittedly, it was really important to define this. And so if you're on your journey thinking about these, I would encourage you to figure out what those definitions mean to you and how you're using them. I will tell you, mine evolve every time I have one of these conversations because things are just moving so rapidly in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And something else that just came to mind too when you were describing, sort of the definitional properties of AI is that, one of the interesting things about this technology is that it seems like AI is only considered AI until it's actually been completed and implemented, right? So, I mean, once AI trading became, a commercially viable technology, of course, now we just refer to it as algo trading, right? And the same thing with, digital assistants, right? So we're talking about like, our Siris and Alexas, right? We've been able to name them as soon as they've actually been implemented. So it sort of presents sort of a squishy line around what is actually AI versus what is not. So very interesting topic to study from that regard. So I want to jump in a little bit here and discuss some of the general importance of AI. And whether we know it or not, AI is all around us. I guess I don't probably need to explain that to you guys, being this is Tech San Diego, but a lot of people don't realize that, we have digital assistants like Siri and Alexa that I just mentioned. Those have become everyday tools used by people at home and at work. And shipping companies use AI to help load cargo more evenly and efficiently onto trucks, ships, and planes once we've placed our online Apple and Amazon orders, right, via Siri or Alexa. And also, as I also mentioned before, algo trading is also another major development in AI that's really opened up the investment world to a lot of people who otherwise might not have had access to it just 5 or 10 years ago, for better or for worse, right? As we all saw with the Reddit GameStop fiasco. Now, a little bit more into my wheelhouse here. The productivity boosting potential of AI is really massive. Now, granted, a lot of this is forecasting, projections, et cetera. But nonetheless, a recent McKinsey report puts the boost to global GDP growth over the next 3 decades at around 0.8 of a percentage point to 1.4 percentage points annually. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot on its head, 1 percentage point, big deal. But we're talking about compounding growth here, right? And so over the course of 30 years, and if we sort of extrapolate where global GDP is right now, I mean, that actually translates to roughly $45 to $90 trillion over the next 3 decades. Let me say that again. That's 45 to 90 trillion with a T dollars over the next 3 decades. And to put a little bit of a finer point on it, I mean, that's 2 to 4 additional US economies being added to global GDP, over the next 3 decades, just from the implementation of AI alone. So let's bring this home a little bit more. Let's have a look at AI's current reach in the region, as well as some of the job market and growth implications for key AI clusters right here in San Diego. So for this study, let me just provide a little bit of background here. We hired a third-party vendor, BW Research, to produce and execute a survey that provided us with insights on AI's reach and business use in San Diego County. And according to that survey, 1 in 4, or roughly 25 to 30,000 San Diego County businesses are engaged with AI and machine learning technologies, at least on some level. And also a key takeaway here is that business size really is the single most important determinant of AI engagement. So as you can see in the graph on this slide, AI engagement ramps up substantially as business size grows, whether the businesses operate in San Diego's innovation cluster or in other more traditional population serving industries, right? So like tourism, healthcare, et cetera. Now, San Diego companies with more than 50 employees were anywhere from 2 to 6 times as likely to have adopted, developed, or invested in AI technologies compared to their smaller counterparts. And this trend is amplified when looking at innovation companies too. So as you can see here, there's 2 bars, right? The darker bars represent companies of various business sizes, but separated by innovation industries. So, that's obviously like our IT, software, telecoms, et cetera. You can see right away that that regardless, even when controlling for business size, innovation companies were much more apt to have engaged with AI.
Yeah, Nate, I might build off that. So, I did say I work for Booz Allen Hamilton, but at the heart of it, we're really a consulting company. And so I'm an AI consultant. So I get to deal with different size organizations in San Diego and again, up and down the West Coast. And, there is a deterrent, a barrier to entry here for small businesses. AI technology, AI talent is not cheap. So when you're a small company of 5 employees and you're like, I'm going to bring on my 6th, is it going to be an AI engineer? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends on what your mission space and what your needs are. And so what I would encourage you, if you're a small business, a startup, and you're thinking about this, there's different ways to think about this. We have a local university program, which is amazing. Go find an AI student doing their master thesis and sponsor their a 3-month capstone project, and get some AI talent to get the proof point that you need for that next round of investment or funding. Pair up with another small business. You can't afford a full FTE, but what if we created a forum where 2 small businesses could come together and say, I need a half data scientist, but I can't hire someone at halftime. Maybe 2 companies come together and they fulfill an entire data scientist job. So, we've got to get creative. We've got to get innovative on how we think about it. And then, shameless plug for me, I mean, there's consulting companies like myself or others. I have people come to me for data scientists for 2 weeks. And I have a model that's built to give you 2 weeks of a data scientist or 2 years of a data scientist. So as you think about the talent, you think about the technologies, sometimes you don't have to build it. There's different strategies that I would encourage all of you to think about. If you're looking to bring it into your organization, it's not always about just hiring someone. Explore the universities, explore that split model, explore a consultancy model as well.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Those are really good points. And putting my economist hat on too, maybe from a policy perspective, right? Something along the lines of student loans, right, which opened up, lending to a lot of credit risks as they were considered. I mean, for better or for worse, writing something into the federal budget along those lines, that would provide some sort of subsidized loan system for smaller businesses who are looking specifically to engage, in AI technologies might be another route that could be explored. However, given how things are looking in Washington and how they have for a while, I wouldn't hold my breath on something like that. All right, so if we drill down a little bit further into the survey responses, several industries were shown to engage with AI and machine learning at an above average rate. And let's just keep in mind, if we go back, if we think about what I explained just a slide before, the average rate is 1 in 4. So we're looking at about 25% of, all companies across the entire region are engaged in AI, but there are several industries that, are engaged at a much higher rate, at least in terms of the number of businesses or the proportion of businesses that are really engaged with it. So these industries were telecommunications and IT, software developers and consultants, and transportation manufacturing. Now, telecom, IT, and software were expected to show up on this list, given that we're talking about AI. But what was interesting is that transportation manufacturing showed up here. And so this was a little bit of a head scratcher, right? And we needed to drill down just a little bit further within that industry itself. And manufacturing, of course, has been undergoing general process automation over the past 20 years, but the emergence of AI in goods production, that's not something that you end up hearing about too often in the national headlines, right? So, what is it about San Diego's manufacturing cluster that really seems to be different from other regions across the country is the fact that San Diego manufacturers, they specialize heavily in aerospace manufacturing and shipbuilding. And it just so happens that these 2 fields, have much more of a high-tech bent than, say, apparel or furniture manufacturing. So the dominance of aerospace and shipbuilding in local manufacturing owes in large part to the presence of the U.S. Navy and Marines here, but also it really produces, a much higher demand to implement a much more, higher tech type of infrastructure in order to get it done.
Yeah, it wasn't surprising to me on those three callouts, Nate. Specifically here that we see those, because those are a lot of the different types of clients that we deal with in San Diego. What I would share with you is I think AI sometimes is this. It can be an unreachable capability set or topic, because there's some notions out there that AI is Skynet or the Terminator or sentient robots that are all going to get us. But sometimes AI is as simple as a natural language processing algorithm that looks at all of your help desk tickets or trouble tickets coming in for a system and actually recommends that we've solved this problem 5 different times, and here's exactly how we've solved it, or identifies a trend in your organization that it might see faster than you. I have an employee whose job before this, he made a computer vision algorithm to sort Legos, because there's a huge resale market for Legos. I didn't know this until I met this employee, but they used to sort them by hand. Now they use computer vision to identify the colors and size, and they're automatically sorted. So, you know, it could be something super complex as computer vision for autonomy on unmanned, any type of unmanned vehicle. It could be something as simple as a help desk solution or a Lego organizer at the same time. So there's such a wide spectrum of how we're seeing industries use AI these days.
Yeah, thanks for that additional color. It's really interesting, right? You know, how 2 people can really sort of register same output in completely different ways. So that's interesting that transportation manufacturing made it onto the Booz Allen radar. It's really it's super interesting, and it's super endemic to San Diego too, which I think is really kind of exciting and an interesting takeaway here. So, you know, taking a look at these AI concentrated industries from a more macro level here, telecom, IT, software, and transportation manufacturing, they support more than 175,000 jobs throughout the region and generate a little bit more than $33 billion per year in gross regional product. So this is roughly about 1 in 10 jobs in the region, and a little bit more than 10% in terms of the total piece of the regional product pie. And when I say gross regional product, that's essentially saying the same thing as GDP. It's just you know, for a metro area. Now, all of these numbers, they include the spillover effects of people directly employed in these industries as these workers spend their paychecks and as companies in these industries order supplies from businesses in other industries in San Diego. So in other words, right, this includes not just the people directly employed within these industries, but it's also, you know, the more general interaction between these industries and, you know, the broader economy, as you know, people who are making $125,000 to $130,000 per year in these industries, obviously, as they go out and spend those paychecks, right, there's going to create additional demand for, you know, anything from additional bartenders and waitresses at restaurants as people go out, you know, to retailers needing to hire additional people, of course, in normal times, right? You know, once we can go back to that. But, you know, what's really interesting, and I sort of mentioned it before, is that these jobs pay quite a bit, right? So we're talking about 125 to 130K per year, like I said, and that's about 4% more than the US average for positions of this type, but it's more than 70% higher than the average salary for all workers in the region, right? So you can expect that there's going to be much more of you know, a direct push you know, towards growth as more workers are hired on in these industries. And if we look at the industries that did not have an above average footprint in terms of AI, so these AI light industries, as I call them, they nonetheless include 2 other major drivers of the local economy, and that's healthcare and tourism. And obviously, as you can expect, right, that, you know, you would expect that the number of workers and the amount of GDP that's being produced by AI light industries is quite a bit larger, right? Because if we go back to that original assessment that only 1 in 4 companies are actually, you know, really involved with AI, then, you know, that leaves another 3 to 4 companies who have not yet. Nonetheless, there is some pretty interesting takeaways here. You know, when we really look at the AI concentrated versus the AI light industries, and we'll get into those a little bit further ahead in another couple slides, but nonetheless, you know, unlike AI concentrated industries, given the fact that tourism and healthcare are such huge drivers of the local economy here, the number of jobs in the AI light block is about 10% higher than the US average when scaling to the size of San Diego's workforce. So we're talking about a very massive group of different industries and companies here. Okay, so I just want to finish laying out a couple more quick points, and then I'll go back to what I was saying before, some of those interesting differentiating factors between the AI concentrated and AI light industries. But you know, really, first thing I want to mention before we get into that is that there's, you know, a huge takeaway from this study and a huge source of relief, honestly, is that AI is creating jobs in the region, not destroying them. So 2 and 3 business survey respondents reported that AI has strengthened hiring demand, and meanwhile, only 19% that AI is reducing the need for workers.
Yeah, you know, so Nate, we've been partners in crime now for a year, like you said. So I'll share like a fun little story. There was some healthy tension, I think, between Nate and the entire advisory board in his very first meeting with us. Because I think the perception was, and I think it's an extremely common perception, it's not unique to Nate, is that AI is going to destroy jobs. And all of us as AI practitioners were like, that cannot be the premise or the hypothesis of this report, because we live it day in, day out. And we were really excited that when the data came back from the survey, it clearly showed that AI and ML are enablers for productivity and to move forward. And you know, reflecting on that, what I would say, and this goes back to kind of my sentient robot Skynet, AI is still in its infancy. It is doing amazing things today, but really AI is best when paired with the human. I'll use the term human in the loop. It's really about how do we use AI to arrive at faster decisions that humans still have to make today. And so when you see this data, we see that employers are not implementing ML and AI to get rid of their workforce. They're actually using it to create more jobs and more time in the day to focus on the more important decisions. And so we were just extremely happy to see this in this result and see that that is true in the economy here.
Yeah, that really was. That was, and I know I needed to take your guys' word for it because you, like you said, you live it day in and day out. But I'm a data guy. I needed the proof in the pudding here. So that was really good. And you know, even going just a step further here, another 62% said that they're looking to fill more AI roles specifically in the next year. So, you know, whereas the previous slide just said that it's creating jobs, so that might not necessarily be AI jobs specifically, but it's other jobs to support the implementation of AI. You know, you even see about as strong of a response saying that, you know, not only is it just general job growth, but it's AI jobs in particular that there's a, you know, a high demand for, that is also really quite interesting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I'd say what I might want to add to that, you know, when you think about these job gains, and this is going to be a roadblock or it's some headwinds, admittedly. You know, I've been on a 5-year journey to build Booz Allen's business out here. We started with 5 local AI engineers, data scientists. We're now at north of 40. And as you see these AI job expectations on this slide and the next one, everyone is subscribing and implementing this capability. So there is a war for talent out there. And it is something that we're all going to have to think about, whether it is working with our local university system to keep San Diego educated staff here in our industry, whether it's upskilling your current workforce. I have organizations that know that they can't go hire a data scientist. They just can't be competitive at this point with the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world, who are gonna start a kid right out of college with a bachelor's degree at like $150,000 a year. Man, I mean, I grew up in the wrong time. I mean, just think about that. How many years did it take before you could even get to a 6-figure salary? And this AI talent is coming out with a Jupyter notebook or some Python code from their capstone project and seeing a 6-figure with equity and stock options. So one of the big trends we're seeing is how do you identify those within your existing workforce that have a proclivity for data or analytics that you can turn into your AI talent? And organizations are putting their own training programs together that include hands-on labs. We're also seeing, like Booz Allen itself, we started our journey in 2011, really around how were we going to do this. We actually got Hogan to come in and create a workforce assessment, and we assessed our own workforce, and we identified those staff that we could turn into AI engineers and future data scientists that have now grown into a practice that's the largest provider to the federal government at this point. So as you think about doing AI, if you haven't interviewed staff, if you haven't seen their salary expectations, it's going to be interesting. There's a war for talent, and we'll talk a little bit about retention, I think, in some future slides. Thanks, Nate.
Sure, thanks, Joe. Okay, so let's see, we're at about 25 before the hour, so I'm gonna start moving forward just a little bit more quickly here for the sake of time here. But I want to go back a little bit more, to what I was saying before, where you can see that there's a pretty stark difference in AI concentrated industries versus AI light industries in terms of the job spillover effects, right? So really what this is designed to show is a little bit of what I was mentioning before about the high pay commanded by these folks. For every 1,000 new jobs that are in these AI concentrated industries, there's an additional 1,400 created in other sectors. And let's make this just a little bit more tangible. So really what that means is that for every 2 people hired in AI heavy fields, there's going to be an estimated net 5 new positions across the broader economy. Now, tourism, retail, et cetera, don't pay quite as much, so you don't see, the ripple effects of those paychecks spilling through quite as much to the rest of the economy. So that's really what we're trying to point out here. But that being said, looks like I'm having a little bit of
the robots are coming for you.
Yeah, wow. My screen just started freaking out here. Let me just give me 1 second, please. Sorry about this.
Never fails. Hey, Sarah, I think you probably have a copy of the presentation. Maybe Sarah can take over on screen unless you're did you unfreeze, Nate?
Yeah, something happened there. Let me try this again really quick. Okay, can you guys see again?
We got it.
Okay, cool. All right. Sorry about that. What is going on with this? Come on.
You know what? Let's, hey, Sarah, if you don't mind taking over, Nate and I will key you on the slides, and we're going to make it a team effort here. So thank you.
I'm switching over to here we are. Give me just 1 quick second here to take over control. Can you see?
We got you.
All right, just tell me when you're ready to advance next slide.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. Yeah, so I guess we can move forward right now. Great. Now, what's interesting though is that if we look for dollar for dollar, it's the AI light industries where the productivity gains are really going to be more crucial here. And that sort of makes sense, right? Because I mean, tourism, retail, there's a lot of people who work within those industries, but they're not the highest productivity industries, right? So there's a lot more sort of vacant space that can be taken up there, where productivity will really have a huge impact. And if we move forward to the next. Or actually, yeah, sorry. No, if we could just go back, sorry. My bad. Okay. But yeah, so, as we're saying, productivity gains are going to be crucial for the AI light industries. And you can see that, for every $1 billion in additional productivity gains, we see about $750 million in ripple effects in additional GRP. And that comes again from like those, supply chains, et cetera, right? As, companies are being more productive, they need more, supplies, et cetera, the rest of it, and, as they're expanding their business. And what's really also interesting and a very important point, at least from the EDC's perspective, is that AI light industries also employ, substantially larger share of women and minority workers too. And, theoretically speaking, as productivity increases in these industries, then what we could see, is a disproportionate raise in pay for women and minority, workers, which could have the added benefit of also, narrowing some of the wage and gender gaps there, racial and gender gaps as well. So that's a really interesting, takeaway here, and it's going to be something that we'll be watching quite a bit as AI proliferation and continues here. Okay, so if we can move forward for real this time, Sarah, thanks. Okay, so now that we have a picture of how AI is transforming the local business landscape, I want to pivot to San Diego's AI potential to boost other US markets. So as we can see from this slide right here, is that most San Diego AI and machine learning developers are already selling products on the market, and clients are located all over the country and the world, right? So this is already pretty mature, here in San Diego versus, a lot of the other markets out there. And, as we can see here, about 3 in 5 respondents reported that the products are in the earlier commercial phase. And if we move forward again, what also is interesting here is that San Diego produced AI could make additional inroads into a number of major US markets. And so as a way to estimate the potential impacts of AI on the job market, an approach developed by Stanford economist Michael Webb was used. And what this approach entailed was distilling the most commonly cited verb-object pairs found in AI patents and cross-referencing that language with job postings. So for instance, one verb-object pair might be recognize face, another might be control emissions, et cetera. And performing this exercise yielded a couple of really interesting insights. So first, the types of jobs in the region with skills overlapping with AI tend to require at least a 4-year college degree, no huge surprise there, and pay nearly $60,000 a year, right? So these are relatively higher skilled, higher paying jobs. And this is also quite different from previous waves of automation that tended to eat away at lower skill, lower paying positions, whereas this seems to be actually enhancing higher paying, higher skilled positions, which is really that's a substantial difference right there. And it's a big takeaway here. And also, it can't be stated enough that just because a job may be impacted by AI or could be performed by AI, it doesn't mean that it will be replaced by AI. So keep in mind, right, that AI is creating way more jobs than it's eliminating. And research from MIT Sloan and Boston Consulting Group also showed that the biggest returns on investment for AI occur when businesses use it as a tool to enhance and complement their workforce instead of as a way to substitute workers. And that's really a key message here and in the report. And actually, I think that Joe, you actually have a couple of
as you were saying, something came to mind. I'm trying to do my dad joke here, or hopefully it'll play off right. When I talk about data visualization, and I think it also applies to AI, there's a couple sayings that we say. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And with great power comes great responsibility. So, I mean, I talk to organizations all the time that are like, I want to go use AI for this. And we're like, okay, let's talk about why, first off. What's the intended outcome? And what do you spend on that today? And it's surprisingly more than you would think. I have organizations coming to me saying, I want to go put an AI solution together. And it's going to take them 20 years for their to get their return on investment on what they're going to spend. And that doesn't make it the right candidate for AI. So, just because AI can do these things doesn't mean it's always the right solution. The thing that I would say that was great about this analysis is you can see all these areas that are looking for AI is, we're coming out of a huge science experiment. Everyone's working from home. If you weren't on early, I'm calling you from Santee, the AI capital of the world right now. I'm talking to people in Japan. I'm talking to people in DC. I'm talking to people in Seattle. And I have staff delivering everywhere. When we stood up our AI practice here in San Diego, it was for completely non-San Diego based clients. And we built it based on businesses that were on the East Coast where we're headquartered. Today, our business is 60 to 70% here in San Diego, and I still have 30% of my workforce in other areas. So when we talk about talent, when we see all of these areas, it's not that the talent has to be where the problem is. I mean, if anything, COVID has taught us that we can still be productive and whatnot. So again, it's around the hiring strategy. It's about how we think about where AI can be done. It's the workforce model and whatnot that was just really interesting when we started talking about this, Nate.
Yeah, and also just to make sure that everybody's clear on exactly what it is that we're showing here is what I did an analysis of the job postings data in each one of these metro markets, right? So I looked at job postings in San Antonio, Seattle, et cetera. And what we're showing here are the positions with the types of skills that could be performed by AI potentially, but where companies in each one of these markets are having a very difficult time sourcing workers. So, the idea here, right, is to, again, go back to that, minimizing, the negative impacts or, any sort of job losses that could come from this. It's really about taking unfilled positions and saying, hey, it looks like you're spending a lot of time and resources trying to hire people for this. Nonetheless, we do have these algorithms that, if you did take your current workforce and train them up on this, then, it would alleviate that pressure and it could really help lower some costs in a very meaningful way across the country. And so what you see are some sort of developing trends here where, a lot of these Sunbelt metros, so San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Tampa, et cetera, they look for recognition types of positions, right, or recognition skills. And, whereas if you go into Chicago, New York, Seattle, Chicago and New York being huge financial centers, right, they're looking for predictive analytics, right, so machine learning type stuff. And so, these just so happen to be, specializations that already exist here in San Diego. So there's a very broad market for this across the country. And, the idea here was to provide a little bit more of a targeted roadmap for AI developers in the region to not just understand that these other markets obviously could use AI, but where they could really sort of focus in based upon their specializations here. Okay, so if we can move forward, and I am also being cognizant of time here. Okay, so let's piece this all together here. Obviously, as we've mentioned a couple of times here, really skilled talent, insufficient capital, and additional workforce training and education are really top of mind for companies here as primary challenges and barriers to the adoption or implementation of AI here. So, in particular, if we think back a little bit to earlier in the presentation here, we also were talking about the fact that smaller businesses seem to be having, issues overcoming these hurdles, right? And if you think about it, the war for skilled talent and, capital access are much different for smaller businesses than it is for larger businesses, right? I mean, larger businesses have access to so many more markets. I mean, they can issue debt, they can, do an IPO, they can, raise funds through stock valuations, et cetera. So, this, I think, sort of ties back into that here, where a lot of these primary barriers are also, inherently tied to the fact that, 98% of the businesses in San Diego are small businesses. So we would expect to see these types of challenges coming up. All right, so if we move forward, sorry.
One thing I'll add on this, and then I know we got to leave some time for Q&A. The one thing I'd tell you is if you have AI talent, retention is going to be something that you need to make a priority. You need to make sure you're hiring the right people and you have the right problems for them. Admittedly, when I was learning about this business 5 years ago, I was hiring people that could do neural nets and do GPU integration. But the problems that my clients were asking me to solve were data visualization and Tableau, and I had a retention issue because I didn't create the right environment or have the right problems for them to solve. So before you go invest, make sure you're investing in the right thing. Make sure you have the right culture that's going to allow an AI engineer or a data scientist to be successful. And make sure you also have the right technology. There are limiting factors depending on where you operate in what industries, on what tools you can use. And so that can be a deterrent here. So if you've got good AI talent today and they're successful in your organization, make sure you're taking care of them, because you will be surprised if they walk out the door, the offer they're going to be walking out for. I've seen people walk out for 250% more than what they're doing, and a $100,000 bonus sign-on package at the same time. It's been ridiculous. So keep the culture, the problems, give them the right tools, nurture and care for them, because they are a hot commodity right now.
Yeah. Okay, great. So if we push forward, so yeah, this is it. Closing remarks, and we can open up for Q&A here. But really, despite the fact that we just discussed barriers and challenges here, at the end of the day, San Diego's AI economy is really in a strong spot. It's the technologies are creating lucrative positions that have numerous benefits across the region, even beyond AI-specific industries. And the enhanced productivity boosting effects on AI-light industries could help lift wages and even narrow the wage gap for women and minorities. And finally, San Diego AI developers could step in to help companies across the country save a lot of money by offering up the services without decimating local job markets. So really, at the end of the day, the key takeaway here is that AI and ML, as it's being produced and implemented here in San Diego, it's really a win-win-win situation.
Yeah, the one thing that I'd say final, and then let's get to Q&A, is, as a native San Diegan, San Diego is poised to help lead AI. We're already doing it in many ways. So let's continue that journey. And my last dad joke or simple truth for all of you is you can't spell San Diego without AI. Just think about it. So let's get to the Q&A session.
Yeah, also really quickly before we put this to bed too, if you want to read the full report, the full web report, you can find it at sandiegoai.org. San Diego AI, all one word. And I'll pass it around too, along with the presentation materials. So with that, that's all we got.
So great presentation, guys. I think it gave a good kind of broad overview of what's going on in the region. One of the things, I have a question. I know there's a couple questions here, but one of the questions I have is that you talked about San Diego being well poised, right? And so one of the things we touched on it, but we didn't talk about it a little bit, is we have these big research institutions, universities that are really global institutions. I'm thinking of HDSI at UCSD, some things going on at SDSU. So talk about the advantages we may have in terms of our university system here.
Yeah, and Kevin, you may help me answer this because you may be better plugged into this, but I mean, you already hit on it. UCSD has a world-class AI data science program. San Diego State also has a emerging program and putting their curriculum together. And I've been talking with USD years ago, and I believe it's maybe an implementation now. So I mean, between those three universities alone, and universities just across the entire country, this is an area, and we're producing more AI talent in San Diego than we have jobs for. I think that there's a metric out there, and I don't know it offhand, but the talent is leaving the region. So if we can find a way to change the value proposition and we can help them get those jobs to stay here, that's a huge impact and benefit for our company. And the Data Science Alliance is out there. You hit on HDSI. There's a lot of really good things in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think the key is for us to retain that talent. It's a little bit of commercial for our Jacobs Talent Initiative, which I have a full-time executive at Tech San Diego, Emma Herreras. That's all she does is spend time on campuses hosting events, bringing companies up to campus, and making sure that companies are aware of the opportunities in a region, because they don't see these big Fortune 500 companies here, and they make this assumption, and it's this perception. And our tech directory also helps in that there's hundreds of companies that they could work for. And so we need to do a better job, I think, what you said, Joe, in making sure that we keep the talent here in the region. Chris, do you want to follow with some of the questions we had?
Sure, we've got one. I've got a question, but I think we want to get to the one that came on the screen here first. For the study, what defines AI ML engagement, and are the results based on Respondee's own definitions of AI and ML?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll sort of answer it backwards. No, we provided the definition of AI and machine learning to be, so when respondents were reflecting on whether or not they were engaged with this, then, it really was based upon that very specific definition that I laid out at the top, so that they understood exactly what it was. So it wasn't more general forms of automation, et cetera. Engagement really came down to whether or not a company was actively looking to either develop or adopt or investing in AI across the region. What we found is that there were only 4 respondents that are actually directly involved in the investment piece. So it really kind of came down to whether or not there was an active push to either develop in-house AI or to adopt it from some other AI developer. So we really were pretty specific in that regard, so that we didn't get a ton of false positives in the results.
Excellent. I just want to say thanks, because I thought this was really informative. It opened my eyes to quite a few things that I, having lived here for basically 20 years, it still is eye-opening. I'm curious, because I see this often when you talked about one of the hurdles is the attracting of capital. And we do have the great talent through UCSD and other universities, which is amazing that you guys are helping to raise awareness there. It's a great resource. But I'm wondering, are there incentives or things that the region does or can do to either encourage capital infusion, because there aren't a lot of investors in San Diego, but there's money coming into San Diego, or to attract companies to relocate to San Diego?
I'll make a couple of relatively broad points on that front. The first thing that I think is interesting, especially being an East Coaster, is the fact that it seems like you're both being helped and hindered by the fact that San Diego is so close to the Bay Area, right? It's a much easier decision, I think, for people who graduate from San Diego or a company that might start out in Southern California to decide they're going to make the move north, right? It's just because you're still relatively close. Whereas, the further away you get from that, the strong or the weaker the magnetic pull towards that Bay Area, that I think is really interesting. Now, one of the things though that I've been tracking and that we track here at the EDC is we do track venture capital inflows into the region, but what it looks like is that healthcare eats up a lot of that, and that's because San Diego it's a really well-known hub for life sciences and stuff like that. So it looks like there might need to be, and granted, technology does bring in quite a bit, but it's typically eclipsed by healthcare funding. I think that's a perception that needs to be altered. And that's something that I think we're trying to do here with this, obviously, is really sort of raising our hands here in San Diego and being able to say, hey, by the way, San Francisco isn't the only game in town. There are other places here that are doing a lot of really good work. So I think it's really just a matter of bringing that awareness and constantly beating that drum.
Yeah, the only quick thing I'd add to that, because I know we're coming up on time, is this has got to be a team sport. We've talked about the university system, we've talked about HDSI, Tech San Diego, Data Science Alliance, industry partners like Cooley or Booz Allen. We all have to be coming together to be pulling that talent and branding AI in that way. And I would love, if we've got any of our local government officials on, let's see some incentives to bring an AI business to San Diego. And really, if we want to be an AI capital of the world, we can take that away from Santee, give it to San Diego. We've got to do this. It's a team sport. So
Here, here.
And Chris, I also think ultimately, right, talent is economic development, right? And so I think as we begin to have some successes in the region in AI, which we already have, I think that success will beget success, right? And so there's also, a little bit of education on Sand Hill about why San Diego, right? And so there are some things I think we need to work on that, but again, I think as Nate and Joe alluded to, we're poised well. I'd rather be in San Diego than I think just about any other region when you're looking at, at AI and the growth of AI over the next, decade or so.
I agree with that.
Yep.
Any other questions? Chris, any other discussion points?
I didn't have any other discussion points. I know we're a minute past the hour, so I didn't know if there were any closing remarks that we wanted to add, but I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation, guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I would like to give those of you who are at home still on, I'd like to give a virtual clap on Nate and Joe for taking time out of their schedule to come and do this. I was also on the planning for this study and worked on it for quite a while with Nate and Joe and the folks. I think you guys did a great job. There is some follow-up, right? So we need to, it's not just we do a report and then we move on to the next one. So we'll be working with EDC and Booz Allen and others in the community to make sure that we're following up on the needs to make this a global AI hub. And again, you can always go to techsd.org for more information on Tech San Diego. I want to truly thank our sponsor for this series, Cooley, always on the cutting edge. Chris is always on the cutting edge. Sarah, did we forget anything? By the way, Sarah Spiva is our events and marketing manager, and she's the one we call not only when something goes wrong, but when something goes right as well. So Sarah, thank you for all your help. Is there anything that we missed before we close this session down?
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. A quick note that this webinar will be available for review and replay at Tech San Diego's YouTube channel. You can just type Tech San Diego into the YouTube search bar to find us. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and we'll see you at the next one. If you receive the notice for this, chances are you're going to receive notice for the next one, and I think it just ended. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Good job. See ya. Thanks.